Ain't that a kick in the head?
Ladies, gentlemen, and barbarians of all ages, most people playing this extremely enjoyable class this season have found themselves in a bit of a conundrum. The best build by a pretty large margin is Hammer of the Ancients, as it was last season, and arguably Season 1 as well, and while there are some changes to it here or there, it is very much the same playstyle as it always has been with just some minor changes, which means a lot of people who have played it before are looking into new options, new builds, and different ways to play Barbarian. Essentially just an escape from the overwhelming pressure that exists to play HotA, and so today we're going to have a bit of fun. Of course, there are other exceedingly strong Barbarian builds out there, but a lot of them actually play quite similar to Hammer of the Ancients as well, so instead of going to one of those, we're going to do something a bit wild, a bit funky, and something that, while a classic concept of Barbarian being a thorns-based build, reflecting damage upon our enemies and making them essentially punch themselves in the face harder than they hit us in the first place, is actually completely different than it's been in any other season before this because of a couple of new things that were added in Season 3. One is a pair of new items that were introduced this season, and the second one, of course, are the changes to charge that every barb build is taking advantage of. It's also worth saying this build is actually extremely strong at mob clearing, big pack clearing, fantastic survival as well. It is tanky as hell, nearly impenetrable even in a tier 100, but it does have a weak point with prolonged single target fights, such as a Duriel, for example. That said, it's only a weak point compared to Hammer the Ancients builds. It still gets through Duriel in like 30 seconds, which is about as good as most other classes do anyways. So essentially you have a build that is way simpler than HotA, as Thorns is a massive portion of our damage and it's mostly passive. It's built completely different than HotA as well, which lets you play differently. It lets you play with a couple of fun underused Barbarian skills too, and it's still extremely potent, extremely quick at dungeon clearing, even up to tier 100s. If that sounds like that type of thing would be fun to you, then you are in the right place. First then, let's go over the skill points then and where we have put them, starting off with our basic skill, which is going to be Frenzy. Fill it with all 5 ranks that you can, and we use this for 3 main reasons. The first being that we can use it to boost our attack speed and generate Fury quicker, and while we do not use a core skill within this build, Fury is still absolutely important to us. The second is Combat Frenzy, giving you 8% damage reduction per stack of Frenzy you have, which is 3 stacks max by default, but 5 within this build, which means at maximum stacks, which you will constantly have, you get 40% damage reduction, which is ridiculous to have from your basic skill. Then the third reason is just that it's the only basic skill the Barbarian has that gains a ton of bonus ranks from a unique, which is what makes it actually viable as a genuine damage dealing skill. Then we move right on to the defensive cluster, ignoring everything else along the way, and here we're going to be grabbing Challenging Shout as well as its enhancement, and then Strategic Challenging Shout, which isn't the one you'd normally take. This taunts nearby enemies, forcing them to attack you and throw themselves at your thorns. It gives you 40% damage reduction base while active 2, gives you 20% bonus maximum health, and gives you bonus thorns equal to 30% of your maximum life. That's the different enhancement we took. This again is great for our tankiness, but it also is just a way to force more passive enemies to actually hit you, or just to boost your actual thorns number in general if there are a lot of enemies around to attack you. Then we take a ton of passives here too, 3 ranks of Imposing Presence for a whack of bonus maximum life, which also gives us thorns, 3 ranks of Martial Vigor for 12% damage reduction from elites, 3 ranks of Outburst over here for more thorns, including more thorns that scale with our maximum life bonuses, then also 3 ranks of Tough as Nails for a percentage boost to our thorns, and also turning 10% of thorns damage into bleeding so that any enemy that attacks is constantly counting as bleeding for free. Then we move on to our brawling skills, and here we're taking a whole lot of stuff. We're taking Kick as well as its enhancement, and then also Power Kick. This gives us an ability with 2 charges that will dump every point of fury that you have for a massive burst of damage. The main purpose of this that we have is actually to fuel Wrath of the Berserker, as it boosts your damage relative to the amount of the fury that you spend while it's active, so we just use Kick to actually dump 2 lots of maximum fury super quickly and get our maximum buff running. But it is also great for single target damage, especially against the bosses that don't have a massive amount of health, so it is just very useful for that too. Then we're going to also be taking Charge as well as its enhancement, and also Power Charge. We also stick the remaining ranks into Charge too to make it 5 out of 5 to lower its cooldown significantly. This gives us an on-demand source of Unstoppable that also gives us a ton of movement speed. It lowers its own cooldown by 9 seconds if you hit 3 or more enemies with it, 6 seconds if you hit a boss, and having the bonus ranks that we do just lowers the cooldown further. With the cooldown reduction in the build. With this, you should actually hit near infinite charge cycles when plowing through packs of mobs. Then we just grab a bunch of passives, 3 ranks of Booming Voice for bonus duration on Challenging Shout, 3 ranks of Raid Leader for passive healing while Challenging Shout is active as well, and this is important as it's our only real source of passive healing. Then we take 3 ranks of Aggressive Resistance for a bunch of bonus damage reduction while we are berserking, and we are berserking constantly as a focus of the build, so this is just always active. Then 3 ranks of Battle Fervor for 3 seconds of berserking granted after hitting an enemy with a brawling skill. After that, we move on to the Weapon Mastery cluster, and here we're going to be grabbing a favorite barb skill of mine, which is Steel Grasp, as well as its enhancement and Fighter's Steel Grasp, altogether giving you a frontal cone pulling attack that makes any enemy hit vulnerable, as well as giving you berserking for 2 seconds if it hits an enemy. This works extremely well as a synergy within the build with multiple different things. Then we grab some passives here, 3 ranks of Pit Fighter over here for bonus damage to close enemies, as well as bonus damage reduction from distant enemies. Then you want 1 rank of Thick Skin for fortified generation when you take damage, and 3 ranks of Counter Offensive for a chunk of bonus damage while you have 50% or more of your maximum life as fortified. Then to round things up, we go to the ultimate cluster, and we're going to be grabbing, of course, Wrath of the Berserker and its enhancements, giving you movement speed, resource generation, and a long timer of berserking when you activate it, as well as increasing the berserking damage bonus depending on how much fury you spend within its active window, with this increase in damage staying applied until berserking drops off your character entirely, meaning if you manage your kicks, your charges, your Steel Grasp well, you can keep the buff from this ultimate active 100% of the time as long as there are enemies to actually hit. Then finally we take our key passive, which is Unconstrained, increasing the damage bonus of berserking just in general, which of course affects all of our damage as we try to stay berserking as much as we can, as well as increasing the maximum duration on berserking, which is important for us too, just making it easier to achieve 100% uptime. With the skill points covered then, let's talk about our technique slot for Barbarian really quickly. All of our damage will be done with our dual-wielded weapons really, and we apply bleed passively due to, well, our choice of passives, so the best option here is the two-handed axe for the bonus damage against vulnerable enemies. Then let's move on to our gear and start with the legendaries and uniques that truly make this build shine like a spiky-ass diamond. First up, we have Battle Trance. This is what increases our maximum stacks of Frenzy. It also makes the bonus attack speed from Frenzy stacks increase our other attack speed too. That doesn't really matter much for us except for, you know, applying to the robot. We want more of this for just for the bonus stacks and the actual affixes on the unique itself, specifically the cooldown reduction combined with the load of bonus ranks of Frenzy as a skill. After that, we have the Paingorgers Gauntlets, the new all-class unique this season, which makes non-basic skill damage mark targets. Then basic skill damage to a marked target will multiply its own damage and spread to all the marked targets. The fun part of this is that we apply these marks with our thorns, with our Steel Grasp, with our charge, and so this is just constantly proccing naturally without much involvement from you purposefully. Then we have Ancient's Oath, the two-handed axe. This gives Steel Grasp 2 additional chains to increase the radius of the cone, as well as increasing the damage that you deal to enemies hit by the skill by up to 50% for 3 seconds afterwards. The extra radius is great for monster slaying, the damage buff is great for bosses or heftier elites, and it also comes with a bunch of bonus ranks to Steel Grasp, which helps keep the cooldown lower too. Then we have Ramalodni's Magnum Opus, bonus damage with skills using this weapon depending on the amount of fury you have, the literal number of fury, which is why we also boost maximum fury, but constant fury drain in exchange. This is our main reason for having fury generation and maximum fury increases important as stats outside of spending it to bump up Wrath of the Berserker with kick. It doesn't affect thorns, but it does affect every frenzy that we cast, so just the other massive portion of our general damage. We also of course use Tybalt's Will for this, the fury generation that it gives us, and up to 40% bonus damage when unstoppable and for a few seconds afterwards is just permanently active in this build really, which makes this incredibly powerful on all on its own just as an item, as it is with most Barbarian builds. Then before we go into the legendaries themselves, I should mention if you have the Harlequin Crest Uber Unique Shaco, you would definitely want to use it instead of our current head slot. If you had the Grandfather Two-Handed Sword Uber Unique, you would also put that on, as thorns can crit and take your crit damage multipliers on that too, so that is overall more value to us than the Steel Grasp unique bonuses. Then you'd also use Doombringer as your second dual wield weapon if you had that as well, most notably because it gives you like 50% bonus maximum life, and that translates directly into a ridiculous amount of bonus thorns from doing that. So every one of those Uber Uniques is actually perfect to slot in here quite easily if you happen to have them. Aside from that, we have our legendaries. Then our two-handed mace has the Needle Flare aspect for up to 80% chance when you deal thorns damage to pulse out your thorn damage in an area of effect around you, essentially just making thorns work like a cluster grenade almost, rather than a single shot pop to the enemy that hit you. Edge Masters on the one-handed weapon as well for up to 20% bonus damage depending on how full your resource meter is when you cast a skill. The brand new aspect of adaptability over here, which increases fury generation with with basic skills when under 50% fury, but increases the damage of basic skills by up to 80% when above 50% fury. So this both helps us generate fury when we do actually want it, but also significantly increases our output with Frenzy 2 just in general. Then our final offensive aspect is Death Wish for just a nice big chunk of thorns when berserking, as again we are pretty much always going to be berserking. Then on your helmet you want the aspect of Numbing Wrath for Fortify generation when you generate fury above your maximum, which we constantly do. This is our main source of Fortify generation, and the main reason is in the slot is if you get Shaco, this is what you replace with it. Shaco is just more important than Fortify is to us. Honestly, we already get some Fortify, this just makes it enough. On the chest we have the Juggernaut aspect as well to give you a massive chunk of bonus armor, and essentially this is just Disobedience aspect from previous seasons but without the wind up period, and with a much larger relative effect if you have a high item power version of the aspect. I don't have a single total armor percent increase affix on any of my gear. I sit at 5700 armor in town, but when I leave town and this activates, I jump up to armor cap instantly, even against T100 Nightmare Dungeon enemies, and the cost of the increased evade cooldown that it gives you doesn't really matter when we have ridiculous charge uptime as well. Then finally we have our boots, and I have two recommendations depending on preferences and content. If you want to just be faster permanently, then you want to use the Ghostwalker aspect. This bonus will just be constantly active within this build, so it makes you faster just in general. Otherwise, if you want some more power or some more utility, go with the Weapon Master's aspect for an extra charge of Steel Grasp to use at will, as well as a chance to stun enemies with Steel Grasp when you use it. With that then, let's go over the affixes that you want on the gear itself. For offensive stuff, you are looking for damage while berserking, main stats, all stats, close enemy damage, basic skill damage, bleeding enemy damage, all those kinds of conditionals that we want to just constantly activate. And you also want resource generation, bonus maximum fury, and cooldown reduction everywhere that you can get it as well. For defensive affixes, you want damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction from distant enemies, maximum life bonuses, which also translate to more thorns. Damage reduction from bleeding is great for us too, and then just damage reduction while fortified as well, but that does become less relevant if you eventually do get a Shaco for your head slot. As well, on your boots, you essentially want just 3 elemental resist high rolls. 4 is great too, but arguably a little bit overkill, as the 4th slot is generally better for some sort of movement speed boost. With gear covered then, you may be saying, hey, if this is a thorns build, why aren't we using, you know, the thorns unique, Razor Plate? And the simple answer is that Razor Plate has no defensive affixes at all, and the gain in damage that you get from the amount of thorns on it is lesser than the damage buff we get from constantly activating Tybalt's Will, which also boosts the rest of the build outside of thorns as well. So to put it simply, either pants or chest sort of needs to be a non-unique slot to have defensive affixes on it, or the build just will not survive tougher endgame content. So unless you are purely speed farming lower level stuff, you are better off without Razor Plate, even in this, which is a thorns build. That said, let's move on to our Seneschal construct setup. No matter what, if you have access to this combo here, you always want to use it, which is Flash of Adrenaline for a damage buff to the player while active, duration support for duration increase on the buff, tactical support for cooldown reduction on the buff, and then Genesis for 150% effectiveness on the buff too. All in all, giving you a permanently active 50% damage buff while in combat. Then for your second Governing Stone, for most content, I recommend Tempest, with Evernight for just bonus skill ranks constantly being active from this combo as the attack speed is fast enough to keep this up, Bleeding support, which increases our bleed damage to moving enemies as well, which is cool with our Thorns combo too. Then if you are doing high tier dungeons, Safeguard support is absolutely fantastic for defense. Otherwise, you probably want something like Arcing support instead for just more actual speed and you're spreading your Tempest damage. As well, if you're going to be doing pure boss content, I recommend switching out to a Firefly setup instead, which we actually put together with multi-shot support as well as piercing support and then seeking support like this. The main idea of this is that it just creates a lot of high damage attacks that don't disappear in one hit like they are intended to, and instead go through the enemy, turn around, and come back to the enemy because they are also homing in on them. And it just makes this really fantastic combo for specifically single target. Then finally, let's just go over our Parmesan board setup. Yes, I know I didn't say Paragon, I meant it. On your starting board, you want to head up and left through all the rare and magic nodes to the glyph socket here and stick in your Ire glyph for bonus damage while berserking and damage reduction from elites while berserking too. Then you want to grab all the strength in the radius, every little bit of it. You want to mop up the rare nodes back on the bottom as well, grab the remaining rare nodes on the board as well, and then head up the right side to the board exit. Here you want to attach the Blood Rage board with the legendary node in the bottom left side of the board. Here you want to go up the left side through the damage while berserking, rare and magic nodes because they're just excellent for us. And then just immediately wrap around to the legendary power itself, which is a 10% chance when killing a bleeding enemy to activate Berserking for 5 seconds. As well, it increases your general damage, just all damage, by 25% of your damage while Berserking stat, letting us heavily double dip in one of our best stats, giving us a bonus of nearly 80% extra damage with my current stats. And then you want to wrap around to the glyph socket as well and stick in the Glexploit glyph over here for our main way of applying vulnerable, honestly, giving us bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, as well as applying vulnerable to enemies for 3 seconds the first time that you deal damage to them, which does apply to our thorns. If anything lives longer than 3 seconds, then you can also use Steel Grasp to reapply vulnerable. Then you want to grab the dexterity and the radius to activate it, as well as the rare nodes here too. Then you want to exit out of the left side of the board and attach on the Carnage board with the legendary power on the top side. You want to head directly out to the left towards the glyph socket itself, and then in here you want to put in the Ambidextrous glyph for bonus effect on the really solid magic nodes that are in this radius. Mine is not level 15 yet, so it doesn't affect all of them, but it also will give you bonus damage while using dual wielded weapons once you've actually got it to that level. After that, you want to head up and grab these rare and magic nodes in the top right for bonus damage while berserking. Then you want to do the same on the bottom left of the board over here before exiting the left side as well. Here you want to stick on the Warbringer board with the legendary node and glyph socket in the top right side. You want to take a detour here to the bottom just to grab these Maximum Fury and also Fury on Kill glyphs, mostly for boosting the damage of Remlotti's Magnum Opus, as well as boosting the damage of Kick itself and the ability to actually funnel into Wrath of the Berserker. Then you want to go to the glyph socket itself here, in which we're going to be sticking in Territorial, which boosts both your damage to close enemies and gives you extra damage reduction against close enemies. Then we just get some nice rare nodes in this radius as well, and just mop up the dexterity that you need just enough to activate it on the way out. Here we're going to be taking one more detour over here for more Maximum Fury and also Maximum Life nodes, which are both fantastic for this build as we've already gone through. Then we'll be exiting out the top side and we'll be adding on the Flawless Technique board with the glyph socket on the bottom side. Here you want to go up the right side directly towards said glyph socket, and you'll be attaching in the Disembowel glyph, which gives you bonus damage against bleeding enemies. Every enemy will be bleeding the second that they hit us, as we've talked about, but it also has the additional bonus of a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of all of our non-ultimate abilities when we kill a bleeding enemy, which is great for basically 4 out of our 6 abilities, as they have cooldowns resettable with this, and everything's going to be bleeding, so it just makes this play a lot more fluidly if you're constantly killing things. You want to grab the damage reduction and magic rare nodes and the nodes required to actually fuel the glyph itself, then head back over to the Carnage board, and we'll be exiting out the top side to attach our final board, which is Decimator, with the legendary node on the right. You want to take a quick detour to the bottom right for the rare and magic nodes right here, then continue up to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we are putting the Undaunted glyph for bonus damage while fortified and bonus damage reduction that scales with the amount of fortify that you have. You want to grab the damage reduction, rare and magic nodes in the radius 2 for more tankiness. Then finally, with our final points, we'll be wrapping over to the actual legendary node itself, which gives us 10% bonus damage for 5 seconds after making an enemy vulnerable, and another 10% bonus for 5 seconds if you overpower a vulnerable enemy. And these are separate, so you can of course stack them if it does line up. That does it for a Paragon board then, so let's talk quickly about how to play. And it's quite a simple build really on that front. Your thorns will do damage passively as things target you. Your active spam button is pretty much just Frenzy to keep your stacks as high as possible while you move. Charge pretty much on cooldown for Tybalt's Will bonuses, Unstoppable, and as a movement utility that is also great damage in its own right, as well as giving us more berserking time. Challenging Shout is both a damage and defensive cooldown, increasing our tankiness a load, activating our self-healing, but also giving us a ton of bonus thorns as well. Steel Grasp is great utility for pulling enemies in towards you, but also applies vulnerable, it applies the marks for paingorgers, it gives us more berserking time, and also damage bonus on any enemies that happen to live after being hit by this ability. Then we of course have Wrath of the Berserker as our ultimate. You want to hit early on and then instantly just Fury Dump by pressing Kick. Fill your Fury again and kick a second time. As long as you have enough Maximum Fury bonus on your gear, that will apply the full bonus from Wrath of the Berserker, just those 2 kicks if you time them right. And your goal just becomes keeping Berserking active past that to keep the damage bonus snapshot going. Outside of that, Kick is only really used for burst damage on bosses, or again just keeping the Berserk timer going from our passives. And that pretty much does it then, everyone. All in all, when it all comes together, this is an incredibly simple build to play, but very fun. It feels like you're just a walking porcupine with little knives in your hands that you're swinging constantly while things die 20 feet away from you mysteriously. And you can just constantly charge through places with reckless abandon too. I hope you all enjoy this build then. It's quite a fun swap up from the current Barbarian meta, while also quite strong on its own too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.